Hi, fourth graders, it's Mrs. Belatash, and we're going to take a look at our plants again. So we have two experiments going. We have one where we are testing how much water plants need in order to grow, and we're also testing how much salt water plants can tolerate. So make sure that you have your two different observations packets. One group of you are testing the salt, and the other one is testing the amount of water. So I'm going to start by taking a look at the plants that I have that have the varying amounts of water. I'd like to start by talking about how I don't think that the design of this experiment is very good. This is an experiment that I got from a plan. I did not come up with this experiment, but I don't like the idea that the cup is in a bag, because when the water cycle happens inside, then what happens is this: all of this water lands in the bag and not back in the bowl. So the next time I do this experiment, I would make sure that I would put a rubber band here so that when the water condensed on the bag, it rolled back into the soil and doesn't end up in the bottom of the bag. Okay, so I have all of my different bowls, and I want to take a quick look at how each container has grown. I have dry, moist, wet, and very wet. This is the dry container. Nothing has grown. This is the moist container. For me, nothing grew in the moist container. This is the wet container. For me, nothing grew in the wet container. This is the very wet container. And in my experiment, I had things grow in the very wet container. I have some corn, I have some barley. Now I'm going to fill out this page, Plant Observations B, based on what I saw in my plants. So I indicated dry, moist, wet, and very wet. I measured the length, the height of my plants. And again, I indicated the different amount of water and the information here. Now, I also put an X here because in my container, the only plant that grew was in the very wet environment. This experiment is a good example of why you need to do experiments more than once. I was at school and I saw some of your plants, and you guys had plants growing in containers that I didn't have growing. So I think it's really important for us to put all of our information together so that we can evaluate how much water different plants can tolerate. Also, I do a lot of planting. I know a lot about seeds and plants. I totally was not surprised that nothing grew in the dry container. I thought that maybe a couple of plants might start to grow in the moist soil, but wouldn't have enough water to continue to grow. My prediction was that the plants in the wet soil would be the best because plants need water in order to grow. That was my prediction. I was not expecting that the plants in the very wet soil would grow the best, at least for me, because I know, and I have seen from my previous experience, that sometimes too much water is not good for a plant. So I would be very interested in finding out if you guys had that similar result at school, where too much water killed your plants. Now we're going to take a look at the plants that were in the different amounts of salt water. Again, make sure that you're going to fill out that form. This is the container that had no salt water. So it was just regular fresh water. And all of my seeds have germinated and started to grow. I have a radish, I have corn, I have barley, and I have peas. So all of my plants are growing. This is the container that had 1 spoon of salt. And here, some of my plants are growing. I have a radish that is growing. This is some corn that is growing. This is barley. My peas are not growing very much at all. Here is the container that had 2 spoons of salt. And I don't have anything growing through the soil. I do have some plants that had roots and started to grow, but nothing has happened. It started to grow, but then once it started getting the salt water, nothing more has happened. This is the container with 4 spoons of salt. I have nothing growing, and I don't even have any roots growing in the soil. Make sure to include your information on your plant observations B sheet to complete all of that information, and then talk about it with your class. Do people have different amounts of growth? Do you have different results? It's very important to do experiments more than once, as you could see with my previous experiment. So let's discuss some of the results that we saw in our experiments and what that has to do with the real world. So when plants are in a very dry environment, at least peas, corn, radish, and barley, they can't grow. These plants need water in order to grow. Even a moist environment is not enough water for plants to really grow. So think about California. California is in a drought. California grows a lot of food for the whole United States. If we don't have enough water to grow plants, to grow food, then we have to find other places to grow that food. I grew up in Iowa, and right now, the last few years, Iowa has been having lots of flooding. They have a lot of snow in the winter in the northern states, and then that snow melts, and Iowa and a lot of the states in the Midwest are flooded, and there's a lot of heavy storms. It's beginning to be too wet. Some plants don't grow when it's too wet. So some places in the United States are having not enough water. Some places in the United States are having too much water. Farmers need to be able to know what kind of plants can grow in their environment. Now, let's take a look at the saltwater plants. So, plants that have no salt water have grown very well, right? They've got plenty of light, they've got plenty of water, and they're all growing. Here are the plants that had 1 spoon of salt. I planted both of these at the same time, and they've been in the same location. Notice that the plants that have a little bit of salt are not growing as well as the plants that had no salt. With global warming, the sea levels are rising. One reason that they're rising is because when things get hot, they expand. So the seas, the ocean level is rising just because the ocean is getting warmer. When the ocean water rises, then it starts to encroach onto the land and push out fresh water. So if a farmer had been growing plants near the coastline, now that area might be getting more salt water and becoming brackish. And as a result, their plants are not going to grow as well. I love this experiment because it really applies to real world conditions and real world situations that we are confronting right now. All right, 4th graders, please make sure that you put some notes in your science notebook about what you think is going to be happening with plants as they're affected by drought, too much water, and saltwater conditions. See you next week, Cougars.